that like that's an accident? Like, because you're describing a system with intent, and that intent comes from where? You're describing a system with a goal. This doesn't make any sense.
No, it makes a lot of
It doesn't make any sense without it. Well, I don't want to use the phrase intelligent design, but like,
well, Tucker Carlson has an amazing conversation with Bret Weinstein on giving him an amazing evidence for God, and it's absolutely amazing. And he even admits that. So let's get right into it. Shout out to Tucker Carlson.
Overarching pattern over time is one of a dawning of a kind of moral enlightenment. It's not, as you point out, it does not prevent the alternatives from repeatedly reemerging. Right, but I mean, let's take, for example.
But how can we even call it enlightenment? Why is it not just our preference?
Let's take the story of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Okay, the story of Jesus, if I understand it, and I'm no biblical scholar, but if I understand that story, the key elements of it, or at least several key elements of it, involve a broadening of the sense of self. Right, a broadening of the in-group. This is what the story of the Good Samaritan tells us, right? This is what the golden rule is. This is, love your enemy. Now, those things are a radical increase in the inclusion of others into an in-group. And the benefits of stabilizing a larger in-group are absolutely tremendous. Now, imagine for a moment that Jesus had said these things in game theoretic terms, and he had tried to convince people with whatever the equivalent of a whiteboard would have been of, the reasons to broaden the in-group at this moment in history. It's preposterous, right? It's not a good argument. Even if it's a true argument, nobody's going to get it. Nobody's going to care, right? So that's not how humans become enlightened. Humans become enlightened because of the power of a narrative that causes them to modify their behavior so that they do function more effectively in light of all of the game theoretic hazards that are always jeopardizing us. Which then answers your other question, I think. Why do the bad patterns, if it's simply good to include others in your in-group, why don't we just simply evolve to default to that and never waver? And the problem is that there's a competition between short-term gain and long-term gain. Effectively, the upgrade in which you in-group more people is much better in the long run. But in the short run, individuals who decide to take advantage of that may have some advantage inside of the group, right? And so building a structure in which you can't get away with it increases the effectiveness of the moral point, right? If you have everybody calculating that it's morally, you should do the morally right thing if you are in a position to be observed, and if you're not in a position to be observed, then you should do whatever is most profitable, right? Civilization breaks down. If, on the other hand, you take a narrative and you say, nobody ever gets away with anything, it's being observed, it's being recorded, and it may be profitable in the short run, but there's an awful lot of punishment that will come later.
That's religion. I don't want to do this because at the end of the day, I don't want to be sent to hell. I know God's watching. But that's not actually a good way to look at why you should do something good or bad. In all of reality, we should want to do good because our relationship with God. It's not we don't want to do bad because God's watching. It's we want to do good because we want to please God. The thing is, doing good won't make us get to heaven, obviously. That still doesn't mean we don't want to do good because God has called us to do good things.
Right? Frankly, I don't even know if the sentence I just said is a religious narrative or a translation of game theory. It's the same thing.
Right. And I would say that everything you're saying, which is complex, quite, is an argument for a creator, because the design is so brilliant as you're describing it. And the end result, of course, is like the perpetuation of the species, of all species. That like, that's an accident? Like, because you're describing a system with intent, and that intent comes from where? With a you're describing a system with a goal.
I am describing a system with a goal, not with intent. Yeah, the system has a goal, and
The goal is the intent, right? The intent is to achieve the goal.
well, that is the sticking point. That
This doesn't make any sense.
no, it makes a lot of
It doesn't make any sense without it. Well, I don't want to use the phrase intelligent design, but like,
Well, let's take a parallel example, and
Okay.
we can trip over the parallel example if
I
we
just think
if we
you've made it.
You're right. There is nothing would make any sense for anything if there's no creator, because there is no reason for anything. You need to have a reason. In order for there to be a reason, there needs to be a creator who gave that thing a reason. Otherwise, there's no reason.
In case for God, and I didn't know if you thought of yourself as an evangelist. But
No.
you just convinced me.
I've made a very compelling case for a belief in God.
But what's
Not
the
for
other?
the
What's the other
existence of God.
explanation?
Well, that's just the thing. Is the other explanation is that there are processes that function. Let's take two examples. Okay, if we talk about the behavior of a seedling, right? The seed is planted, it breaks open, it germinates, and the seedling rises against gravity and breaks the surface, and it puts out its two little solar panels. And at that point, it bends towards the sun. You could say, what is the other explanation for that other than a desire to reach the sunlight? And the answer is actually, in this case, we know the mechanism, and it's amazing,
Yeah. No, I agree.
but it's not desire.
But it expresses a value, though, and the value is life is better than death.
It expresses
To exist is better than not to.
Yes, it expresses an objective, but not a desire.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's a semantic question. I don't know. I see a huge difference between the two, but
that's exactly my point. Is what I'm not trying to compel people that the answer that I think I can see is right for them. I'm trying to convince people that the answer I think I see is actually not dogged by some paradox that makes it unviable. It's too cumbersome to live by it. But it's, just like the example of the baseball game. The baseball game happens, it's made of atoms and energy. And you could imagine commentators sitting there describing the energy and the material in, the objects. And it would be the worst, most cumbersome commentary at a sports event conceivable.
But it wouldn't really tell you anything useful.
Right. That's the point.
Right. So what I see by your description is an entire universe screaming at the top of its collective lungs, life is better than death.
No, only the living stuff thinks that.
Well, I mean, I'm not exactly sure we can measure or define living as precisely as we think we can. But whatever. I mean,
yeah. Look,
but in general,
Only the living can scream that life is better than death. Obviously, dead things can't, but the living can. That's something.
So we describe as living that we can observe are all moving in the same direction. And the message, being a message guy, I can discern this. Life is better than death.
Yeah, I agree. Another example. Okay. Let us agree that love is a profoundly, I'm struggling for words even good enough to describe it, is a profoundly transformative property of life that is as close to a North Star as a human being can have. And I don't mean just romantic love, familial love, love of country, all of these things. Love is this tremendously powerful force. Now let us say there's actually a lot of neurochemistry that we can describe relative to love. Which story do I want people living by? Oh, definitely the narrative one in which you just simply surrender to the power of this thing and you allow it to be a guide. That's definitely, I don't want to live amongst people who view love as just a bunch of chemical reactions, yada, 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 right? That's a horrifying dystopia. But it doesn't make it untrue that love is mediated through neurochemistry.
Yeah, why can't both be true? That doesn't.
They are. That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point.
Right.
They are both true.
Then you have to admit there's something greater than ourselves then. You have to. If we all just evolved to a higher order, we're just animals that have chemical reactions that shows affection towards one another.
Only one describes the purpose of it, the origin of it.
Only one is useful for a living.
No, but I'm saying the theist believes he understands why this is happening.
Right.
The atheist has no idea.
Well, in a sense,
so really that's the question. It's not a question of how things happen. It's a question of why they happen.
well, I'm trying to talk to two camps in a sense,
Right.
and maybe this will be more of a theme of our discussion on other topics here, but there's a kind of nuance that has become impossible. And I'm trying to make a point to the atheists about what they've failed at and why they're not reaching lots of people and why they're losing ground. And I'm also trying to make a point to the theological folks about Darwinism and about the utility of figuring out how to reconcile these things rather than view them as competing explanations.
There's not another person I know who I could have a conversation on this topic about in the way that we're doing. And I just want to say, I think you're one of the most open-minded in a good way people I've ever met.
Thank you.
I think that's interesting. And atheism is losing ground, and we know that God is working, and He's longing to have a relationship with you. You do have purpose. You are created for a reason. So I encourage you to go to Jesus today. Know that He loves you. Know that He's longing to have a relationship with you. In the description below, there's a link to help you to decide to follow Jesus for the first time. I encourage you to do that today.